Anyone who try to be politically correct. Anyone who qualifies for a discount with the MTA, assuming they have discounts anymore, gets a seat. Otherwise, we do have a little room in the bleachers.
Come on, we don't bite.
If somebody who's a little younger wants to flip to a stool, or somebody older, before I put my foot in my mouth. But anyway, you know what I'm saying.
You saw the Blueberry play. You get to see
a couple of quick announcements. As you see, the TV just went off, but I know tonight is a big game, Team USA versus the Dominican Republic in the World Baseball Classic. Once this is over, the game goes back on, and feel free to stay all night, whenever I have to get home. But yeah, we'll be here. If you want to stay and hang out and watch the game, we'll have it on. I want to thank everybody very much for coming and for being so gracious as to help with the seating. And as I was just telling Ira, this is, I think, tied with George Vessey's event and Chad Harback, the Art of Fielding, as our three #1 events in attendance. So thank you so much. Everything in the clubhouse, for the most part, is for sale. If you're interested in anything after the event's over, please see me. I'll be glad to help you. Likewise, usually the author sells the books. Tonight we're doing it a little differently. I know a bunch of you have already purchased the books, but we still have more. No one's allowed out of here until all the books are sold. So once this is over, I'll be selling the books back there, and Ira will be certainly signing the books. And I think now we're good to go with the... Does anyone have questions not related to Ira, the book, the Mets, anything else? Any questions? And we'll have plenty of time for questions to Ira, so don't worry about that. Oh, what you missed. We have one more stool if you want to take it.
I'm better standing than
all right.
stool.
All right.
The great Willie Weinbaum, the ESPN great reporter, just entered the premises.
Son of Sam and Alice Weinbaum.
Thank you. Made it all happen.
One of the best that's ever been at what he does.
I should come late all the time.
Okay. Okay, we are live in the Bergino Baseball Clubhouse at 67 East 11th Street in the landmark cast iron building, Greenwich Village, City of New York. We start tonight as we always do. To those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. To those who have been to the clubhouse before, welcome home. Tonight happens to be the opening night of our spring book event calendar, and throwing out the first pitch is a Puliter-Prize winner, which is about as good as it gets. So please join me in welcoming Ira Berkow to the clubhouse. And the book, for those of you listening to the podcast, is Summers at Shea, Tom Seaver Loses His Overcoat and Other Mets Stories by Ira Berkow. And I think what we're going to do to start, since those of you who know Ira's work know what kind of storyteller he is, and it would be kind of a waste if we didn't let Ira tell stories here tonight. So I think what we're going to do is just kind of start by throwing out some names, some Met-related items, and Ira's going to take it from there. So I think probably the best way to start is how this book starts, which is with Casey Stengel.
Yeah, if you would, I would start with just one step ahead of that,
Okay.
from the subtitle of the book, Tom Seaver Loses His Overcoat and Other Met Stories. And then I'll be happy to segue into Casey Stengel, because Casey is always a segue. it was the baseball writers' dinner of January 1970 after Seaver's great 1969 season. And he was honored at the baseball writers' dinner, and I was at the baseball writers' dinner. And then we had agreed to, he was going, the next night, he was going to get the Hickok Belt Award. Hickok gave an award, Hickok Belt people in Rochester, New York, gave an award for the best professional athlete of the year. And Seaver was going to get this for the great pitcher for the Miracle Mets of 1969. And so Joe Louis, who was also going to be honored, and an outfielder named Kurt Blefrey, who used to play with the Orioles. I think he had a cup of coffee with the Yankees too, possibly. But anyway, I don't know what Kurt was doing going to Rochester, but Louis, Seaver, me, were going up there. And so we took it from the baseball writers' dinner, we took a cab to, would be Penn Station, going up to Rochester. I think not Grand Central. Whichever one it was, the dinner was at the old Americana or the Sheraton. And so we got into a cab, and as we're going to in the cab, Seaver says, I had an overcoat. What happened to my overcoat? Anyway, he lost his overcoat, and we're driving, and it was really interesting. Seaver and I and Blefrey were in the back seat, and Joe Louis was in the front seat, and we're driving, and the 1970 and the this is not in the book, but the driver was kind of a hippie, had kind of long hair, and he had on some music. And as we're driving, and Blefrey had been drinking, started making some remarks about the sexual proclivities that he thought that of the driver, which weren't his. And he started making some remarks. And then at one point, and Seaver and I were not saying anything. Joe Louis was not saying anything. And as we got driving, Blefrey said, "Hey," to the driver, "turn off that hippie music." And with looking straight ahead, Joe Louis said, and Joe Louis must be unlettered, you know. And Joe Louis said, "That's Greek music." Total silence. Blefrey never said another word. But then we get to we took the train, and we were talking who was the greatest athlete. So we were just talking around and before going to bed, and I remember Seaver thinking that it was Sandy Koufax pitching all those at that time, pitching those 4 straight no-hitters. So anyway, we went to go to bed, and Seaver and I were in this compartment, and we flipped, and he got the bottom bunk, I got top bunk. How many of you can say that you slept with top second? So anyway, so now so now it's like 6 in the morning, and we get out, and it's Rochester, and it's cold. Seaver's lost his overcoat. And we're waiting for a cab, and it was just kind of bad on. And here was Blefrey, who had made a jerk of himself. And he had his coat. And so I'm waiting for the cab, and it's cold, and it's dark. And Blefrey takes off his coat and puts it over Seaver's right shoulder and said, "You have to keep this warm, Tom." and he redeemed himself. Casey Stengel. I came to New York in 1967, and so I wasn't here when Casey was the manager of either the Yankees or the Mets. But he was a consultant for the Mets. And that's when I met him. He'd be in the dugout. He'd come from California. He'd sort of hang around, and you always thought of Casey as being funny and being a joke. And I remember before a game, he was standing out with a lot of the writers on the field before a game, near the dugout. And he started talking in his Stengelese, I think we all know this convoluted kind of language, which only Stengel, it was a he was the only person in the world who spoke Stengelese, you know, and because nobody else could imitate it. But he started talking, and I'd never seen him before. I never was around him. And he started talking about how to play the outfield. And as he's talking, which was funny, I started seeing how to play the outfield in a way I've never seen it before. And I started thinking, this guy's brilliant. You know, not only does he have his own language, he really knows the game in a way that so many of the rest of us don't. And so he was wonderful. And then we talked about his wife Edna, and he said you know, Casey had been a baseball player himself in the major leagues for a number of years, and he told me that Edna was the best catch he ever made. And then there was a question there was a question I always wanted to ask him, and I was around him some, but I never got around to it. Maybe I just hadn't thought about it at the time. Maybe in retrospect I think about it. But when he was with Edna in a romantic moment, and when he whispered sweet nothings into her ear, was it in Stengelese? And then I had done a book with Walt Frazier called Rockin Steady. I was working a guide to basketball and cool, and I wanted to do a book with Casey on it was called the Casey Stengel's historical. It was first base. It was how to play the various positions. It was an instructional book. But it was with his history. So at first base, all the first basemen he had ever seen, and how they played it. And then the next place, second base, with pictures and everything. So I thought this was a great idea. And so I was with Casey in a hotel room and explaining to him the kind of book I wanted to do. And the book with Frazier had come out, and it got a lot of attention. It was really a beautiful book. And he turned the page and said, well, this is a perfection thing, you know. So I thought, wow, I think Casey may want to do this. And so, but then he started describing to me about Babe Ruth and about how it was harder to play the infield in the earlier days because they didn't wear steel cups in the infield. And you know, if a ball bounced up, it could really hurt you. And so anyway, he said he would think about it. And a couple weeks later, this is in the book. I get a letter from him in green ink, as I recall, and of course I've saved the letter, and saying to me that he was interested, but it would be too much work, and one of the most memorable, one of the most memorable things about the letter is that he started one paragraph with a semicolon. The letter's a collector's item, and then he died like 6 months later or something, you know. But he was really smart, really funny, and you know, like people ask me, who are the best interviews you've ever had? And I, off the top of my head, there are 4. And there are 4 who, what's a great interview? Someone you ask a question to, and they give you a great answer, that you don't have to ask them another question. And they talk in pictures. So it's all visual. And so my 4 favorite people who I knew, if I would just ask them one question, I fill up a notebook. And one was Casey. And one was Muhammad Ali. And one was Pete Rose.
Oh, wow.
And the other, a lot of you probably may not realize, but it was Fran Tarkenton, the quarterback, who was really smart, really, really smart. But those 4 guys, and some others who were also great were Arthur Ashe and Bill Bradley. Arthur Ashe, Bill Bradley, and Tarkenton. Tarkenton and Bradley went to a Christian summer camp years when they were young. And then also Ash got to be friendly with them. And these three guys, three of the smartest athletes in our generation or beyond, they would go to dinner together. And I would love to have had a tape recorder at their dinners. But Fran is, and he's a Fox News kind of guy. I give him slack. I give him slack on this.